Danishes are multi-layered laminated pastries that are made using a yeast leavened dough that's created by mixing flour, butter, sugar, and of course, yeast. It's kneaded, given time to rise, folded around a butter block, then topped with a decadent cream cheese mixture, followed by a fruit topping, in this case, a blueberry compote. It's definitely not what you would consider a beginner pastry, and it is a little bit labor intensive. But with some patience and an afternoon to spare, you can make and eat these incredible bakery treats the same day. So here's how I make a blueberry cream cheese Danish. The first thing that we want to do is mix the dough. So I'm going to add to a bowl 3 cups of all-purpose flour, a 1/4 cup of sugar, 1½ teaspoons of salt, 1 teaspoon of instant yeast, 3 tablespoons of melted butter. Make sure to let it cool just a little bit before you add it in. And lastly, 3/4 cup of room temperature water. Then we're just going to start working this together. I like to start with a spatula first, mixing it as much as I can until it becomes one large clump of shaggy dough. At that point, we can dump this out onto the counter and begin to knead until smooth. A lot of people like to use a stand mixer for this, but it's totally doable by hand. As you can see, I'm just using the palm of my hand, applying my body weight into each press. I've been doing this for a few minutes now and it's coming along, but it still kind of looks like the surface of the moon, so we need to keep going. And once it starts to look like this, nice and smooth, it's pretty much ready. I'll place this in a bowl and cover it with a damp cloth to keep it from drying out. And we're just going to let this rise for about an hour and a half at room temperature until it nearly doubles in size. While we wait for that, we can go ahead and start the cream cheese filling. So I'll add 8 ounces of room temperature cream cheese to a bowl, followed by 1 egg yolk, a ½ teaspoon of vanilla paste. I like to actually seed the vanilla seeds, unlike vanilla extract. Then a 1/4 cup of powdered sugar. Then I'll add just a little bit of lemon zest for a citrusy kick. Whoops, you did not see that. My cream cheese was not completely brought to room temperature, which made it a little bit harder to mix. Go ahead and bring it all together with a spatula, then I like to switch to a whisk, which is going to help it become a little bit more aerated and fluffy. You might have to put a little bit of muscle into it to really fluff it up, and after a few minutes you should have a nice, smooth, creamy mixture. I'll add all of this to a piping bag, which is going to make it a lot easier to apply later, then set aside in the fridge until we're ready to use it. Now on to the butter block. If you've never made laminated dough before, this is the fun part, at least to me. We want to use 3 sticks or 12 ounces of cold butter. I like to use Kerrygold because it tends to have a higher fat content compared to other brands. I'll lay out my parchment paper and dump out my butter that has been cut into 1-inch pieces. So you can see that I have a square measured out in the center of my parchment. It measures 7 inches by 7 inches. We need this butter block to be able to fit inside of our dough eventually. And I'll just fold along those lines, making sure to keep it within those parameters. I'll turn this over, and using the rolling pin, I'm just going to lightly start beating the butter into place. We want it to completely fill out the 7-inch square, as evenly as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect here. Don't put too much stress on yourself if it isn't a perfect square. We just need it to fit inside of our dough. Just be patient and keep working it until it's as evenly dispersed as possible. I like to straighten up the sides a little bit, and this should be good. So here is our butter block. Since this has been out of the fridge for a few minutes now, and it's starting to get softer, I'll just pop this back in the fridge to firm it up, and we can move on to the blueberry compote. I think blueberry just pairs so well with pastry and cream cheese. It's sweet, but not overly tart. It's just delicious, and really easy to put together. We'll add about 1 cup of berries to a small saucepan, heat turned to low, medium. I'll add a tablespoon or so of lemon juice, a ½ teaspoon of vanilla paste, then about 1 tablespoon of sugar. And I'm just going to toss all of this together. You can see how I'm gently tossing it around, not squishing. We want to try to keep the berries whole. We're not making jam here. This is more of a compote. Continue to occasionally stir, and you'll start to see it becoming more syrupy. This shouldn't take but 10 minutes or so. I'll take this off the burner and set aside in a glass bowl to cool and thicken. Alright, back to our dough, which has been rising and it looks to be about doubled in size. I'll give it a few pokes and you can see that it slowly springs back, telling me that this is ready to roll out. I'll ever so lightly flour my surface and pull the dough out. I'm going to start lightly stretching it, being careful not to tear it. And we want to shape this to a square that's about 10 inches by 10 inches. That should be a good size for our butter block to fit inside. Once again, this does not have to be perfect. We just need a vessel for our butter at the end of the day. I like to keep a measuring tape handy just to make sure that I'm in the ballpark, and this looks to be good, 10 by 10. I'll wrap this up in parchment and place it in the fridge to firm it up a bit. Since we want the butter and the dough to be of similar temperature, it's going to make handling it that much easier. After 20 minutes or so, I'll take this back out and grab my butter block, which is also firmed up a bit. And you can see that it's still firm, but it's somewhat pliable. I'll open up my butter, and then I'm just going to place this diagonally inside the dough. And we're going to essentially fold in our sides like an envelope, encasing our butter. We want to completely seal it in there. I like to fold all 4 sides and then pinch together the seams. My dough and butter are still pretty firm, so I'll start rolling this out. If this step took you longer than expected and your butter is starting to thaw, feel free just to throw the whole thing back in the fridge for about 10 to 20 minutes, then begin rolling. The fridge is our friend with puff pastry. I like to roll it out into a long rectangle, then fold into thirds. I'll fold the top down, then bring the bottom over, give it a turn, and start rolling again. And once again, I'll perform the same fold in thirds. This is starting to thaw, so I'm going to wrap this back up and stick it in the fridge. I like to do a total of 3 to 5 folds when it comes to puff pastry. You can do more if you like, but I do find 3 to 5 totally sufficient for flaky layers. I'll take this out, and again, I'll roll it out. I'll roll both ways to increase the width. Don't worry if a little butter starts seeping out. It happens. If it keeps happening, stop rolling, wrap it back up, and place it back in the fridge. I'm going to trim a little off the end in an attempt to make this a little bit more squared off, and I'll do the same fold. I'll stick this back in the fridge to firm up. I'll roll it out one last time, but this time I'm actually not going to fold it. I want to flatten it out to about a 1/2 inch in thickness. I like to place a piece of parchment on top, then press it down a little bit. And once I get it to the size that I like, I'll stick this whole thing back in the fridge. So if you were counting, I did a total of 3 folds, which is fine. Like I said, feel free to keep going, but this should be fine. But I'll trim off the ends to make it a little bit more rectangular using my pizza wheel. And then I'm going to divide this whole thing in half long ways. Then slicing crossways so we end up with a total of 8 pastry squares. I'll place about 6 of these onto parchment paper, saving 2 to freeze for later. Then let's check out our work here. Look at those layers that we've created. Butter, dough, butter, dough, butter, dough. That's what we want. Now, what I'm doing here is making sure that the centers don't rise up as much during the baking process by poking these little holes using a fork. This is going to allow air to more easily escape, leaving a nice crater for our cream cheese and blueberries. I'll take out the cream cheese piping bag and I'll begin to add about a tablespoon or so right in the center of each pastry. Then going back to our lovely blueberry compote, I'll add about a spoonful to each one, making sure not to overfill them. Make sure to get some of that syrup along with the berries. And these are ready for a second rise. I'm going to leave these out at room temperature for about 45 minutes just so they puff up a little bit. You can also leave these in the fridge overnight. But like I said, I want to eat these today, so I'm choosing the counter. Quick side note, if you do choose the counter rise, make sure to stick them back in the fridge for at least 30 minutes prior to actually baking. The butter layers need to be cold, otherwise they're just going to melt out into the pan. Alright, so we're in the home stretch. These are puffed and ready to bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 to 30 minutes. Try to keep the oven door closed for at least the first 10 minutes to lock in all that heat, allowing for a quick oven rise. And here is literally the fruits of our labor. Make sure to let them cool before eating. You'll notice that the centers are going to collapse a little bit, and that's exactly what we want. I know that this was a fair amount of work, but I promise you these pastries will taste better than any store-bought danishes you've ever tried. Look at all those flaky layers. As always, ingredients will be listed in the description. Thank you for sticking around this long. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and good luck with your pastries.